All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking into a case that is honestly as chilling as it is complex. We're going to examine the disappearance of a 5-year-old girl named Haleigh Cummings from her home in Florida. It's this massive mystery that has totally baffled law enforcement for well over a decade now, and it is just packed with conflicting stories and incredibly frustrating dead ends. So our goal today is to cut through the rumors, objectively lay out the facts piece by piece, and really understand exactly how this entire investigation unfolded. So right off the bat, we have to ask, how in the world does a missing child case become a murder investigation when there is absolutely no body? That right there is the central anomaly of this whole case. Usually, a missing person case stays a missing person case until remains are actually found. But here, law enforcement made the incredibly rare decision to declare a young child murdered without ever finding her. How does something like that even happen? Well, let's trace the steps backwards to find out.
Section 1. The night she vanished. We're going back to February 9th, 2009.
To really grasp this investigation, we have to look super closely at the timeline from that night in Satsuma, Florida. Haleigh lived in a mobile home with her father, Ronald Cummings, and his 17-year-old girlfriend, Misty Croslin. That evening, Ronald headed out to work his night shift, and he left Haleigh and her younger brother in Misty's care. Now, according to Misty, the evening was completely 100% normal. She put the kids to bed and just went to sleep. But at 3:27 a.m., that quiet timeline abruptly shatters. Ronald returns home from work to find Misty totally hysterical and his daughter Haleigh is gone. He immediately dials 911. Now, Misty's initial claim contained this highly specific detail. She told police that when she woke up, she found the back door of the home propped wide open with a cinder block, and Haleigh, who was last seen wearing a little pink shirt, was nowhere to be found in her bed. The immediate reaction from law enforcement was exactly what you'd expect for a suspected stranger abduction. They issued an Amber Alert right away. We're talking a massive ground search involving hundreds of volunteers and ATVs. They even deployed helicopters equipped with infrared cameras to scour the really dense, swampy woods surrounding the trailer park. It was just this frantic, all-hands-on-deck rescue mission driven by sheer terror.
But as those critical first hours ticked by, the investigation took a really dramatic turn. Section 2. A shift in the search, from the woods to the home.
So the stranger abduction theory, it began to completely fall apart under police scrutiny. While Misty claimed an intruder propped that door open with a block, the physical evidence told a totally different story. There were zero signs of forced entry. None. Furthermore, neighbors and even the family themselves pointed out that the household dog reportedly never even barked that night.
Because of these glaring inconsistencies, police shifted gears and began intensely questioning the caregivers, even bringing in polygraphs. Then, agonizingly, over a year passed with absolutely no sign of Haleigh. And this led to a very grim turning point. Police officially declared the 5-year-old deceased, and the physical search abruptly shifted from the surrounding woods to the murky depths of the nearby St. Johns River.
And this brings us back to that rare concept of a no-body homicide. Proceeding with a murder investigation without a victim's remains means you are relying entirely on circumstantial evidence. By making this declaration, police signaled a huge shift. They believed this was no longer a kidnapping or rescue mission. They firmly believed this was a death and that someone was actively covering it up.
So, who was covering it up? Let's get into Section 3, the primary suspects, the caregivers under a microscope.
Law enforcement zeroed in heavily on Misty. The Putnam County Sheriff even publicly labeled her the key to the case. Her inability to provide a consistent timeline made her the absolute primary person of interest. Investigators actually used some pretty intense psychological tactics here. They physically brought her out to the St. Johns River search site while divers were actively in the water. They were likely hoping the sheer stress of the moment would finally trigger a confession. But she remained totally silent. Meanwhile, there's a whole other layer of complexity unfolding in the background. As the search dragged on, rumors of a really heavy drug environment in the home became impossible to ignore. In January of 2010, so less than a year after Haleigh vanished, Misty was actually arrested in an undercover drug sting. And then, shortly after that, Ronald Cummings, Haleigh's father, was arrested on similar, unrelated drug trafficking charges. Investigators definitely saw an opportunity here. Sheriff Jeff Hardy famously stated that jail gives people time to sit and think. The hope was that the immense pressure of incarceration, combined with these really severe drug trafficking charges, would finally force one of them to crack and offer up a breakthrough about what happened to Haleigh. The sheriff even noted a complete shift in Misty's demeanor when she was behind bars. But that breakthrough never came.
Instead, both of these key figures ended up tangled in massive legal consequences for their drug offenses. Misty Croslin was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Ronald Cummings was sentenced to and served over a decade. Get this, they even got married and later divorced while fighting these legal battles from the inside. But regarding Haleigh, complete and total silence.
Which brings us to a massive void for investigators. Section 4, Unraveling the Theories, a tangled web of accusations. The working theories of this case evolved along a pretty clear path. The stranger abduction idea, that was quickly dismissed due to the total lack of forced entry. Instead, the leading law enforcement theory became that Haleigh died inside that mobile home on the night of February 9th. And this sparked intense speculation over whether it was an accidental overdose, given the drug environment, or a direct act of violence. The sheer nightmare for investigators here is that they have been absolutely inundated with changing stories, secondhand accounts, and relatives constantly shifting the blame onto one another. Over the years, people have literally come forward claiming Haleigh overdosed and was thrown in the river, while others have hinted at far more violent ends involving other family members who might have been visiting the trailer that night.
But here is the major roadblock. You can have all the accusations in the world. Overdoses, violence, river disposals. But without Haleigh's remains, law enforcement has no definitive proof. They just can't verify these secondhand rumors without forensic evidence, and they certainly cannot bring homicide charges without knowing exactly what happened.
Section 5. A case without closure. The ghost of Satsuma. 16. Let that sink in for a second. It has been over 16 years since a bright, bubbly 5-year-old girl went to sleep and just simply vanished. For over a decade and a half, she's been a face on a poster, essentially becoming a ghost in a cold case file. And the current reality we're left with is incredibly bleak. Nobody has ever been held accountable for her disappearance or her death. Ronald Cummings was actually released from prison, only to be rearrested in December 2022 for drug trafficking and battery on an officer. Misty Croslin remains incarcerated. The lives of the central figures have been entirely defined by crime, but the absolute most important question, what they truly know about that night, is still completely unanswered.
But we do look to the future with this specific year, 2031. That is the year Misty Croslin is currently scheduled to be released from prison. And it leaves so many in the true crime and law enforcement communities wondering, when she's finally free from that sentence, will she finally break her silence? Is the truth finally going to come out?
We're ultimately left with this single, haunting question. What really happened on that February night in 2009? We might not know the exact mechanics of her disappearance right now, but we do know this. A 5-year-old child went to bed in her own home and never woke up, leaving behind a mystery without a single physical trace. Look, if you or anyone you know has any information regarding the disappearance of Haleigh Cummings, you are strongly urged to contact the Putnam County Sheriff's Office or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Thank you so much for joining me as we walk through the complex facts of this case. If you found this explainer helpful, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into fascinating mysteries. See you next time.